Hello everyone, my name is Matthew Robinson, and for my AP research project, I focused on time perception, dopamine, and the effect of reward. I'd like to start by first talking a little bit about the process of developing my question. I came into class knowing that I was really interested in the human brain and that my question would likely have something to do with psychology. From there, I was also recently interested in the passage of time and how our brain perceives time. Most of my initial questions focused around the idea of whether or not there was a difference in time perception while we were sleeping versus when we are awake. However, as I was coming up with and doing some preliminary questions and research, I found it difficult to find a gap in knowledge to address in this area, and this is what led me to pivot towards thinking about the saying, time flies when you're having fun. I wondered if this study or if this question had ever been researched before and if there was any sort of knowledge about whether or not this saying had any truth behind it. From there, I started looking into the alteration of time perception with dopamine, and that is where I found a gap that I was interested in addressing. I asked my question, how do primary and secondary rewards affect time perception in high school students? Now, before I move on, I would first like to introduce you to a few definitions of some key terms in my question. First, perception is defined as awareness of the elements of environment through physical sensation. Primary rewards are rewards that our brain is hardwired to value. Examples of primary rewards would be food, water, or shelter. From the time we are born, a baby will have a dopamine response to a primary reward because our brain is hardwired to value these things. On the other hand, secondary rewards are rewards that we learn to value over time because society has told us to value them. An example of this would be money. If you were to hand a baby a $100 bill, you wouldn't see any sort of dopamine response in the baby's brain because it hasn't yet learned to value money. This is why money is a secondary reward. Moving forward to our current understanding of human time perception, it is key that you understand the most commonly thought system for how our brains perceive time. The system is called the pacemaker switch accumulator system, and it consists of a pacemaker, switch, and accumulator. The idea is that the pacemaker is constantly sending out pulses towards the accumulator, which counts the pulses and then based on its count is able to estimate the duration of time. The key is that there is a switch in between the pacemaker and accumulator that scientists hypothesize is controlled by attention. When you are giving your attention to the duration of a timed interval, the switch closes, allowing the pulses to flow from the pacemaker to the accumulator to be counted and allowing you to accurately, or to some degree accurately, perceive the duration of time. When you aren't focusing on the duration of a timed interval, the switch remains open, and the pulses from the pacemaker never actually reach the accumulator to be counted, therefore you are not able to accurately estimate the duration of the timed interval. I would also like to focus on a few studies that had a large impact on my research. The first one is a study conducted by Jan Failing and Michael Thieves. This study played a large role in the formulation of both my question and my methodology. In this study, these two men tested the effects of monetary rewards on the accuracy of time perception in humans. What they found is that when subjects were presented with a secondary reward, they perceived stimuli to last for longer than the stimuli actually lasted. They also found that the larger the reward the subject was promised, the less accurate their time perception was. This is what pointed me towards questioning the difference between the impact of primary and secondary rewards, because the research of these two men clearly shows that secondary rewards have some impact on time perception, and I wondered if primary rewards had a similar or a different effect. Back to their research, these two men explained the results of their research by hypothesizing the existence of a new structure in the pacemaker switch accumulator model. They referred to it as the starting gun. These two men believed that the starting gun shoots off, and that is what actually triggers the switch to close in the pacemaker switch accumulator model. They hypothesized that when dopamine was present in the brain, it caused the starting gun to shoot off prematurely, causing the switch to close earlier than it should, therefore producing an overestimation of the time interval. They also hypothesized that the more dopamine was present in the brain, the earlier the starting gun shot off. Another study that directed me towards analyzing the difference between primary and secondary rewards was conducted by Saskus et al., and it used fMRI technology to look into which areas of the brain were most active when subjects were presented with primary and secondary rewards. The findings from this study that are most relevant to my research were that monetary rewards sparked more activity in the ventral striatum and anterior orbitofrontal cortex, whereas food rewards sparked activity in the somatosensory cortex. The key here is that primary and secondary rewards are sparking activity in different areas of the brain. So this encouraged me that I would be able to find that they would also have different impacts on time perception as well. And finally, the most similar study to the one that I conducted was conducted by researchers at the University of Melbourne. In this study, they were also testing the effect of primary and secondary rewards on time perception, and they used 5 different types of rewards in their study. For a secondary reward, they used money, and they used 4 different types of primary rewards: non-caloric, non-sweet primary rewards, non-caloric sweet primary rewards, caloric non-sweet primary rewards, and non-caloric non-sweet primary rewards. The researchers gave out rewards between every round of testing and had their subjects consume any rewards that they were given. And what they found was that the rewards that had the largest impact on time perception were the rewards that were caloric. My research differs from this because I am making subjects wait until the end of all of the testing before distributing rewards, and therefore eliminating any sort of impact that consuming the calories would have on their time perception. My research also focuses in more on the anticipation of reward. So now to begin talking about my actual procedure, the first question that I was faced with was how I would test time perception. In past research, there are 2 commonly used models for how to test time perception. Those are production models and estimation models. Production models focus on the subject producing a target time duration. So for example, I set the target time duration at 2 seconds, and I would tell you to hold the button down for 2 seconds. You would then hold the button down for however long you perceive to be 2 seconds. Then I would compare how long you actually held the button down with the target time of 2 seconds to see if you underproduced, accurately produced, or overproduced the target duration. Estimation models, on the other hand, involve presenting the subject with some sort of stimulus and asking them to estimate how long the stimulus was presented for. An example of this would be if I displayed 2 dots on a screen for a certain amount of time and asked you to estimate which dot was presented for longer. As mentioned earlier, I based my experiment heavily on the procedure created by Michael Failing and Jan Thieves. I created a computer program that tested time perception using a time estimation model. In my program, subjects went through 24 rounds of testing, and the data was recorded to be later uploaded into a spreadsheet for analysis. Each round went something like this. 4 white dots called standards flashed on the screen for 500 milliseconds each. They flashed one at a time with a 500 millisecond pause of a blank screen in between each dot. After the 4th dot and the 4th pause had finished, a colored oddball dot was presented on the screen. This oddball dot was either green or red and was presented for either a slightly longer or slightly shorter amount of time compared to the standards. After the oddball dot had flashed off, the subject was asked to estimate whether the oddball dot was presented for a longer or a shorter duration than the standards. Based on the correctness of their response and the color of the dot, they would receive a reward. If they were to get the question correct and the dot was green, the subject would be presented with a secondary reward at the end of the testing. I used 25 cents as my secondary reward. If they were to get the question correct and the oddball dot was red, they would be presented with a primary reward after all rounds of testing had finished. I used 1 Oreo cookie. Once I had finalized my procedure, I had to then collect subjects to test upon. I did this by sending out a Google form to all of the students in my school, gauging their interest. I sent out 2 Google forms, and anyone that had indicated that they were willing to participate, I distributed a human consent form. I went into this phase of my testing hoping to have 25 subjects or more, hopefully of a diverse range of ages and genders. Unfortunately, after I collected my human consent forms, I had only collected 11 subjects, 8 of which were female and 3 of which were male. So I was unable to achieve my goal of a 25 or more sample size. However, I decided to continue with my procedure regardless. The way that I went about actually, that picture did not show. There we go. The way that I went about actually conducting my procedure with the subjects was having them sign up for time slots using a sign-up genius, and then meeting them in a classroom. I gave them a short debrief of what my study was aiming to test, what would be going on the computer screen in front of them, and also how they could earn the rewards that they were promised. Before they started the procedure, I allowed any subjects to ask questions that they had, and I sat next to the subjects as they were moving through the computer program, recording their accuracy to later be uploaded into a spreadsheet for analysis. After all was said and done, I had conducted my experiment on 11 different subjects, 8 female and 3 male, of varying ages between 14 and 18. I used a single-factor analysis of variance test to compare the means of 2 sets of data. The first set of data was derived from rounds when the oddball dot was green, meaning the subject would receive a secondary reward. The second set of data was derived from rounds when the oddball dot was red, signifying a primary reward. I uploaded data into these spreadsheets by taking when rounds where the subject underestimated the time interval, I input a negative number into the spreadsheet. When rounds when the subject accurately perceived the time interval, I uploaded a 0. And when they overestimated the time duration, I input a positive number. This way, the means of each of these 2 columns would be giving a general idea as to whether subjects were tending to overestimate, accurately estimate, or underestimate the target time duration. The results of my single-factor analysis of variance test tell me that I failed to reject the null hypothesis that there is no difference in the effect of primary and secondary rewards on time perception in high school students. In other words, this means that there is not sufficient evidence to support the existence of a difference in impact between the 2 types of reward. Now I'd like to talk about a few implications of my study. Time is a key component of everything we do in life. Habits, schedules, and routines all depend on our ability to accurately perceive time. It is also key to our patterns of eating, sleeping, working, and even engaging in subconscious human functions like breathing. Learning about how our brain perceives time and possibly even ways to manipulate our perception of time is an exciting frontier for the future of science. Unfortunately, my research was unable to identify primary and secondary rewards as the key to manipulating our perception of time. However, my data did find that people overestimated the time duration a higher percentage of time than they underestimated it, corroborating the findings by Failing and Thieves that reward in general may cause subjects to feel like time lasts longer. Knowing that primary and secondary rewards have a similar effect on time perception may also have applications in the world of business and marketing. A large part of marketing is figuring out ways to make your products and advertisements engaging and memorable. With the knowledge that primary and secondary rewards cause similar effect on time perception, someone designing an ad can feel comfortable advertising primary and secondary rewards an equal amount of the time. If, for example, my study had found that primary rewards caused a dramatic overestimation of time duration, someone in advertising may want to advertise primary rewards more frequently than they advertise secondary rewards, because that would mean that their advertisement for a primary reward would be more engaging for the viewer than if they had published the same ad for a secondary reward. As I was moving through my procedure and calculating my results and analyzing, I did find a few holes and limitations in my study. The first one that I would like to talk about is the fact that my study was very contingent on the fact that each and every subject knew exactly which dot meant which reward, and as they saw the dots, they were thinking about what reward it would bring them should they get the question correct. I did tell them this information, which dot coincided with which reward, before they began the procedure. However, I have a feeling that it may have gone in one ear and out the other. If this is the case, it would have made essentially all of my data a wash. One thing that I could have done differently to combat this would be to give the subject a quick quiz before I allow them to start the procedure. This could be something as simple as just asking the subject, if the oddball dot is green and you get the question correct, which reward will you get once you finish the study? This way I know that they've retained this essential information. And the biggest limitation of my study was its scale. I have a feeling that if I had been more patient and waited to recruit some more subjects and maybe had access to more funding to give subjects higher rewards, I could be standing here in front of you presenting different results right now. The study conducted by Failing and Thieves did suggest that when subjects were presented with larger rewards, it did have a greater impact on time perception. So I believe that if I had been able to scale up the magnitude of my rewards and studied on more people, the end result of my study could be different. Thank you everyone for listening. Here's my references.
I'll add a soundtrack.
Okay.
How did you determine which results generated by your research method were most important in informing your new understanding?
Yeah, this is a good question because when I finished with my testing phase, I was starting to analyze the data, and I came up with a bunch of statistics that I ended up just throwing out. Some of these stats were things like the total number of underestimations across all subjects or the percent accuracy for red dot rounds. I ended up asking for some guidance, and I was told that the most effective way to analyze my data was to test for statistical significance using an ANOVA test. So in short, I determined which results were important through a suggestion by someone who knew more about data analysis than I did.
Okay. How do your findings provide direction for future research?
The idea of being able to manipulate our perception of time is something that could bring a lot of benefits to society if we can figure out a way to do it. My research suggests that primary and secondary rewards are not the key to this manipulation, but that does not mean that there isn't another way to do it. My research could spark other questions that compare different outside factors on time perception. One example could be something like environmental temperature or something like that.
Okay. What was the most important research skill you developed as a result of this process, and how might you apply it to your future endeavors?
I would definitely say just like the overall ability to grind out a really big project. There was a ton of stuff we did this year, and at times I felt like I was just kind of floating around in empty space with nothing to grab onto. In other words, I didn't really know what to do next. This experience is something that I haven't had before in school, and I'm glad I got to experience it this year because it's something that will probably happen in college and my future career. Feeling lost and not knowing what to do is intimidating, but taking things one step at a time and looking not at the final deadline, but rather what you can do right now to make process was just super helpful, and I'm sure this is a strategy that I will employ later in life as well.
Thank you. All right.